Okay, I'll get to the introduction quickly because it's already pretty late.
Yeah.
I'd like to introduce our next speaker about the Nobel Literature Prize, Dr. Pooja Sancheti. First off, apologies for the delay. I'm really sorry.
Okay,
Okay,
that
I'll
much
just
can
give
be
it to you.
done. Yeah. Uh, yeah, let me begin with, yeah, I don't know. I'm going to try and do it really briefly because I know it's a Sunday evening and it's already 7:15, 7:10. We were, I think, hoping to wrap up by now. So yeah, I'm here to talk about the Literature Prize, the Nobel Prize in Literature. Just give me 1 second. Let me start sharing. Is the screen visible? Could one of you please let me know?
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
It's visible?
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, so I will quickly talk about the Nobel Prize in Literature that of 2021. As you may know, the Nobel Prize in Literature is typically given for the entire oeuvre of somebody's writing. So they could be a dramatist or a poet or a novelist or a short story writer. Typically, the Nobel Prize is given looking at the entire body of work that they have produced, right? So this year's prize went to a novelist named Abdul Razak Gurna. He was born, towards the end of my presentation, I'll talk about African writers and the Nobel Prize. There aren't too many of them. Gurna is the latest. He was born in the Sultanate of Zanzibar, which is now a part of Tanzania. And he was about 18 years old when he moved from Zanzibar to England. He's a novelist and a short story writer. And very interestingly, I mean, one more tract of his profession, which I will talk about. Anyway, so he's a novelist and he writes in English, although his first language is Kiswahili, but he writes in English. And he identifies as of Arab heritage, of course, also identifies as an African post-colonial writer. And I will talk a little bit about post-colonial if we have time. So the other trajectory of his career is that he also has a PhD in English literature. And for those of you who read widely or who read a lot of literature, you would know that typically writers don't necessarily dabble in academia, right? Usually they become established as poets or dramatists or novelists, and then universities might call them to do creative writing courses or things like that. But Gurna's trajectory has not been like that. He's had a PhD for the last many decades, and I think in '82 he got his PhD. He's been teaching. He's been part of academia since then. He teaches post-colonial and English literatures, and he's now an emeritus professor at the University of Kent, which is also where he did his PhD. Right? So it's a very interesting trajectory that he's both an academic and a writer. It's also very interesting that his work has been nominated for several very prestigious awards, but he's actually never won any of them, right? So he's been shortlisted and longlisted for many of these, and I'll just talk about that in a couple of minutes. And neither are his books very commercially successful, right? So it's not like so while he has had a lot of critical acclaim, academicians have written about him, and he is part of syllabi and curricula throughout the world in post-colonial studies courses, especially African English writing. His books have not been very popular, right? So it's not like people generally read it, and you can tell a lot when you order a book off Amazon and it takes a month to arrive, right? So after he won the Nobel Prize, I ordered this book of his, Afterlives, which is his latest novel, and it took a month for Amazon to deliver it. So you realize that this typically happens because there aren't enough prints, right? And this was obviously printed after he won the Nobel Prize, because if you can see, there's a sticker over here. It says, Nobel Prize 2021. So although he's read in academia, he's not been read outside of it too much. And yet, very surprisingly, and this is the most surprising part, that he's actually extremely readable. He's not an esoteric theory-oriented writer. He's very easy to read. You can get lost in the story because he's a very, very smooth storytelling style. So I mean, I would recommend that everybody read him, and it's a surprise that his books were not more commercially successful. As I said, he's also an academic, so he also writes, critical essays. He's also edited volumes on African writing. He publishes articles on several post-colonial writers, including Indian post-colonial writers. Right. So for me, this trajectory that he's both an academic and a writer simultaneously is a very interesting one. Right. So these are some facts about Gurna.
Excuse me, ma'am. Are
Yeah.
you changing the slides because we can't see the change?
No, I'm now going to the next slide. Can you see it?
No, we are still seeing the first slide.
You're seeing the title slide?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. How about now?
Hi, yeah, we can see the new slide now. Thank you.
I wish you had told me. Okay, anyway, so I'll give you a second to just run through this. I've already talked about it. I think this is a regular problem with Google Meet. Anyway, I mean, there's nothing apart from what I've already talked about. Okay. So some of the key features of his fiction writing, that he writes novels and short stories, primarily in English, not primarily, in fact, almost exclusively in English. Because as I said, when he was 18 when he moved to England, of course, he had been trained in English before that as well. Although Arabic, Kiswahili, and German, because Zanzibar was a German colony, all these languages find their way into his writing. But the primary base, or the most prominent language which he writes, is English. Right. Most of his fiction, except maybe one book, most of it is located in the coastal regions of East Africa, so Zanzibar, Tanzania, and so on. And often set in the temporal period often set in the colonial period or the post-colonial period. But the idea of the colonial and the post-colonial, what happens to an ex-colonial or a decolonized nation, is very, very important to the way he imagines his stories. Right. In the next passage, I'll show you, a little bit about his process of writing. But essentially, this is one of those things that sort of gets talked about him all the time, that he actually began to write out of homesickness. Right. So he moved from Zanzibar to England when there was a lot of the Zanzibar Revolution, and there was a lot of political unrest. It was hard for him, so he left England, and then he began to write sort of, almost with the sense of feeling very displaced. And then that sort of became the defining feature of his writing, right? So he uses his writing to essentially talk about what the experience of a refugee is, or what is this feeling of displacement that one feels, or what does it mean to be in exile. And these words are sort of, they're not out of fashion, right? I mean, these are things that are very current, very important issues that are very contemporary to our world, right? Immigrants, the refugee crisis, war, displacement, genocide. None of these are, things that we can say are in our past. I mean, they're very much in our present, right? Alongside, he also sort of, thinks about or explores the idea of what it means to be, sort of what is a homeland, right? Or what is the notion of memory? Like how does the past really ever leave us, or are we constantly battling with our past or dealing with our past in our present? What is the trauma of colonialism and war? What is the lingering trauma of colonialism, which means even in a post-colonial society, the effects of colonialism sort of linger on and rarely ever pleasant. Also talking about race relations, what the developing world is like. And one of the key features of his writing is that the characters in his novels are typically, even if they are historical, I mean, in the sense that even if the temporal sort of setting is historical, he often, the main characters will always be sort of people who would not make their way into archives, right? Now, archives typically, the notion of archives, right? Archives are typically where people, where, historians or, a high official in a court, or the king or the minister or somebody writes something that makes its way to the archive, right? But ordinary people's writings, if they are writing at all, or their voices, I mean, we should not get caught up in this idea that writing is the only legitimate way to make history. Their voices don't make it to the archives, and those are the kinds of characters he develops in his stories, right? So you'll have shopkeepers and homemakers, and their stories are told in this setting of a colonial or a post-colonial or a war-torn sort of landscape, right? So these are some of the features of his writing. Because time is short, I had two slides where I just wanted us to read excerpts from his writing. And I debated whether I should show you a sample of his fiction writing or if I should show you a sample of his non-fiction writing. So this is an essay where he just talks about his history, his sort of his own past of writing, right, and his relationship with writing. And I thought this was nice because it sort of exemplifies the kind of themes that reflect in his work over and over again. So we could maybe take a minute to go through it quickly, and I'll maybe read out if you want. So this is him sort of reflecting on when he was 18 years old, right, and he had just come to England. Okay, let me just read it. I think it's much faster that way. In any case, at the time I left home, my ambitions were simple. It was a time of hardship and anxiety, of state terror and calculated humiliations. And at 18, all I wanted was to leave and find safety and fulfillment somewhere else. I could not have been more remote. I could not have been more remote from the idea of writing. Starting to think differently about writing in England a few years later had to do with being older, thinking and worrying about things that had seemed uncomplicated before, but in a larger part had to do with the overwhelming feeling of strangeness and difference I felt there. There was something hesitant and groping about this process. I began to write casually, in some anguish, without any sense of plan, but pressed by the desire to say more. In time, I began to wonder what the thing was that I was doing. So I had to pause and deliberate and think about what I was doing as writing. Then I realized that I was writing from memory and how vivid and overwhelming that memory was, how far from the strangely weightless existence of my first years in England. The strangeness intensified the sense of a life left behind, of people casually and thoughtlessly abandoned, a place and a way of being lost to me forever, as it seemed at the time. When I began to write, it was that lost life that I wrote about, the lost place, and what I remembered of it. In a way, I was also writing about being in England, or at least about being somewhere so unlike the place in my memory and in my being, a place safe enough and far enough from what I had left to fill me with guilt and incomprehensible regrets. And as I wrote, I found myself overcome for the first time by the bitterness and futility of the recent times we had lived through, by all that we had done to bring those times upon ourselves, and by what then seemed a strangely unreal life in England. Right? Uh, you see the themes of memory and strangeness and estrangement, displacement. Uh, the sort of the trauma of having left one's home, but also the distance, the advantages of distance, right? Like coming to England, having this sort of weightless life, and which he feels sort of enabled him to write better, right? Um, this is from an essay, this previous quote, the previous slide, and this slide is from an essay called Writing Place. It's available on JSTOR if you want to read the whole thing. I just thought I'll take some parts of it. So we can skip the sort of, and he talks about, what it means to be a post-colonial writer, a post-imperial writer. How do European audiences receive that? He also feels that, Europeans, especially people in the UK, are very open to learning about India because they want to learn about India, but they're not open to learning about Africa. And he, of course, talks also about German colonialists, really the German nationals who don't want to learn about their colonial past in Africa. So I think I'll just go towards the end. When he sort of recalls his time in Zanzibar as a schoolboy, and he says, "I was learning from the mosque, from Quran school, from the streets, from home, and from my own anarchic reading." So he also talks about how the libraries were few, and they were barely well sort of stocked. So he just read whatever came his way. And what I was learning in these other places was at times flatly contradictory to what I was learning at school. This was not as disabling as it might sound, though it was sometimes painful and shaming. With time, dealing with contradictory narratives in this way has come to me to seem a dynamic process, even if by its very nature, it is a process first undertaken from a position of weakness. Out of it came the energy to refuse and reject, to learn to hold on to reservations that time and knowledge will sustain. Out of it came a way of accommodating and taking account of difference and of affirming the possibility of more complex ways of knowing, right? So this sort of tells us what his process of thinking as a writer is. And it also, interestingly, is very close to his style of writing fiction, right? So I thought this serves two purposes. And I would strongly recommend that everybody go and read at least some bits of Gurna's writing. And if you don't want to read anything, I'll give you a couple of links, YouTube links, which you can just listen to. So again, in a lot of ways, he is a bit of an anomaly as far as Nobel Prize literature Nobel Prize winners go. He has written only 10 novels, which actually is seems quite a bit, but compared to several other novelists, it's not on the higher bound. As I said, several of his books have been, I've just listed his novels here. Several of them have, as I said, been nominated, shortlisted and longlisted for very prestigious prizes, but none of them, he's not won any of them, or his novels haven't won any of them. He also writes a lot of short stories, essays, criticism. Those of you who do literature know what criticism means, and nonfiction, and edits volumes as well. As I said, he's both an academic and a writer, right? So the Nobel Committee for every award puts out a statement. You might know this. It usually comes in the press almost immediately. And for Gurna, their statement was, and some people have called it very, it's overly sort of flowery, because his writing really is far simpler. And by simpler, I don't mean in a negative sense, okay? By simpler, I mean it's deceptively simple. It takes you in and you don't realize you're reading a story, because it'll just read like somebody talking to you, right? And of course, those are the most gripping stories, and you don't have to reach the dictionary. Anyway, the Nobel Prize Committee said they are giving him this prize for his uncompromising and compassionate penetration of the effects of colonialism and the fate of the refugee in the gulf between cultures and continents, right? And terms like refugee, immigrants, emigre are very loaded terms. And, the more you think about it, the more you'll perhaps, discover the sort of the long history and politics and, economic differences and race differences or racial stereotypes that sort of go into creating these terms and the way they are understood and interpreted. My recommendation, if anybody wants to look up Gurna's work, if you're not going to read his entire book, that's fine. There's a lovely story called The Wood of the Moon. It's on JSTOR, so it should be accessible to most of you. So look it up. If you're unable to access JSTOR because you're off campus, let me know. I can send it to you as an email attachment. If you don't want to do that, just go on YouTube and listen to him read out a story. I think it's called The Tale of the Arrivant or something like that. It's on YouTube, so you can look it up. You'll find it. It's become very popular after he's won the Nobel Prize. So Gurna is in this list of writers from Africa, and I've put all the writers who had any connection to Africa. Many of them, like Albert Camus, was born in Algeria, but after he grew up, he lived in France. Wole Soyinka is from Nigeria, the first Black African to win the Nobel Prize in all the categories. Najib Mahfouz was the first Egyptian to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. Then there's Nadine Gordimer, who's from South Africa, who was the first white African woman to win the Nobel Prize. And there's Coetzee, also from South Africa. Doris Lessing is sort of British Zimbabwean, so some people count her as African and other people don't. Leclésio, again, was born in France but lives in Mauritius, so people are split between whether he's more French than Mauritian. And then there's Gurna, who's born in Zanzibar is now part of Tanzania. So he was born in Tanzania, but he's lived in the UK for most of his adult life, right? Some interesting things. He's the first Black writer to win the Nobel after Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison was an American writer. She won it in 1993. Again, for those of you who haven't read Morrison, I would strongly suggest reading what's my favorite Morrison? Beloved, right? And he's also, of course, the first African writer to win the Nobel Prize in Literature after 2007, not counting 2008 Leclésio's prize, right? So these are some statistics about African writers and the Nobel Prize. There are several amazing African writers who haven't won the Nobel Prize, but that's also true of writers from other places. Generally, it's a good year for African writers, both those located in African countries, but also African diaspora. So this year's Booker Prize went to Damon Galgut. This is Damon Galgut for the book The Promise, set in South Africa. The International Booker Prize went to David Diop. The book was originally written in French. The translation is At Night All Blood is Black. And then I don't know if Sar's photo there. This is Sar, who also wrote a book in French translated into English. And then Karen Jennings and Latifa Mohammad's books were nominated for the Booker longlist and shortlist, respectively. Right. So that's roughly putting it in a context of African writers and sort of an international audience. These are all primarily novelists, which again then has its own caveats of how much acceptance do non-Western forms of writing really have with these sort of prize juries and things like that. Anyway, so yeah, so I hope you will look up Gurna's writing. I can assure you that you will enjoy it. He's a very sensitive writer, very uh, non-fussy, so to speak. I mean, I've heard his interviews, and he comes across as an extremely sort of balanced and sensitive person. And yeah, I mean, I hope you'll pick up something of his. That's all I had to say. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Ma'am, how will you be sharing the PPT for this?
You want me to share the PPT? I can share the sources with you, Saransh.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the essay that I quoted from, the one with the, what is it called? Yeah, Writing Place, that and the story that I thought all of you could read on your own are both available on JSTOR, but I can also send them to you as documents if you like.
Yeah, I'm not on campus, so if you could send the document.
I'll send them. Just send me an email and I send them both to you, as I'll forget.
Okay, ma'am. And one question, ma'am, is there any special reason why the Nobel Prize in Literature is given for lifetime work as compared to the other categories?
I don't know. I think partly it's also, for example, economics, right? I mean, economics is also typically given for you've arrived at like some theory which has been tested over a while and is now acceptable. With literature, yeah, it's always been the case, So sometimes what the Nobel Committee will do is they will maybe mention like one work of a particular writer which they say is exceptional, but it's not that that work is getting the Nobel Prize. So the writer is getting a Nobel Prize for everything that they have produced so far. So that's my understanding of why the Nobel Prize comes at the end of one's career rather than the beginning of one's career.
Okay, ma'am.
Ma'am, I just wanted to ask for stories or any thing which is related to the colonial time. When the story is coming from the oppressed, often novel community is from the European side, so it actually disrespects them. So there are cases.
Wait, it actually what? Sorry, I didn't get it. Actually, what?
They don't usually like consider such stories. So there were nominations before for really good stories. Like for example, Sardar Udham, for this instance, they didn't get nominated because it was opposing the British. So how much how much guarantee can be put into the authenticity of the like people's situation over there at that time to the stories?
Are you asking this specifically in the case of Gurna or generally?
Generally, but in this case, for this webinar, Gunas.
That's a very complicated question, right? Because, and I think Gurna also touches on that, and most post-colonial writers are very conscious of this, right? That when you're writing, let's say in English, and when your work is going to be published by an international publisher, and when you know that these awards are set up in the West, right? What stance do you take as a post-colonial writer, right? Should you be soft and nice and looking towards the future because then that will sell better, or should you be very harsh and critical, or should you be harsh and critical about your homeland, saying that we have enough problems, like we don't need to blame the colonizers for it? So these are various stands that various writers at different times have taken, right? As far as Gurna's authenticity of his history writing is, I think he's one of those writers that I would say can safely be read as not having sold his soul, right? But it's not an easy question to answer, and post-colonial writers deal with this issue all the time, deal with these accusations also all the time that they are really pandering to the West. And then like you brought up this idea of this Hindi film which was not nominated for the Oscars because they said that it's too anti-British, right? But I also remember I think 2 years ago when the Korean film The Parasite won the Oscar for the best movie, I remember the director at some point, when he was nominated, when his film was nominated, he made this very flippant remark like, it's okay, I mean, the Oscars are the Oscars, it's a very Hollywood, it's a very American thing, I don't necessarily look to it, right? I don't necessarily need endorsement from them, right? So this is also a way of sort of saying that it doesn't necessarily like have to mean the world to me, right? And so there are lots of writers, for example, not just post-colonial, but also writers that all of us read, or people in literature departments. It's part of our curriculum, or these are people who have shaped hundreds of other writers, and they never won the Nobel Prize, and that has really made no difference, right? The Nobel Prize is useful because it does give visibility to authors, right? Whether it's a short-lived visibility or a longer visibility, they definitely give visibility to the author. So in Purna's case, for example, his work, as I said, has not been commercially very successful. It's been read by a lot of people in academia and post-colonial theorists, for example. But it's only after the Nobel Prize that now there's sort of this effort to translate his work into Swahili so that people in East Africa read it, right? So his work, for example, doesn't have much currency in Tanzania, right, or in Kenya. And the idea is that these kinds of awards do publicize this, so it's not just now for a Western audience. Now Gurna is like a name that people around the world know, right? And then there's this desire to translate them and read them and work on them and so on. So in that sense, I think the award works. And going back to your question about whether post-colonial writers are genuine, it really varies from writer to writer. Some of them really are, and I think Gurna is one of those people who is.
Thank you, ma'am, for your insights.
Thank you, Prabha. Anybody else? Okay, yeah, I know it's Sunday and it's already 7:36, and I think it's dinner time for most of us. So I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. It made me I wouldn't have read Gurna so quickly, but I did read him, and I thoroughly enjoyed his writing. So thank you, Saransh, for being here. Thank you all for being here. The organizers, is it okay if we stop the meeting now?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you again. It was pretty wonderful.
Thank you so
I
much.
don't really usually check about the literature prize, but this was very interesting.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. Thank you all very much. Good night.
I'd like to thank everyone who attended till now, especially Dr. Krishnan
Thank
and
you.
Dr. Christine.
Thank you very much. Thanks for
Thank
this
you.
opportunity.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.